When people argue about free will, they usually reach for philosophy. They talk about intuition, about morality, about the undeniable feeling that you chose to click on this video. And they conclude that of course we're free. The feeling is too vivid to be a lie. But as a physicist, when I look at the equations that actually govern the matter you're made of, I come to a very different, much more unsettling conclusion. The question isn't whether you feel free. Everybody feels free. The question is whether the laws of physics leave any room whatsoever for a you that could have done otherwise. And I want to show you today that there is one equation, one line of mathematics you can write on a single stretch of chalkboard that appears to close that door completely. It's been closing it for 300 years. And I want to tell you about the one philosopher who stared straight at that equation, understood exactly what it implied, nearly destroyed himself over it, and then refused, flatly, stubbornly, magnificently refused to accept it. Now look, before we get anywhere, we have to be very precise here, because free will is one of those phrases that means 12 different things to 12 different people, and 11 of those meanings are useless. So let me define the thing physics is actually able to say something about. The claim on trial is this. Given the exact state of the universe at some moment, every particle, every field, every last scrap of information, could the next moment have unfolded in more than one way? That's it. That's the whole question. Could the future, holding the present fixed, have been different? If the answer is no, then whatever you call the feeling in your head when you decide something, it is not what you think it is. It's the sensation of a computation completing, not the act of an author writing. So let me write the equation, and I want you to really look at it because people wave at it in popular science and never sit with what it says. In its oldest form, it's Newton. Force equals mass times acceleration. F equals m minus a. Three symbols. Now, don't get confused by how humble it looks. That little equation is a machine. You feed it the positions and velocities of every particle at one instant. Physicists call this the state, a single point in an enormous abstract space we call phase space. And the equation cranks forward and hands you the state at the next instant, and the next, and the next, forever. There is no slot in that equation where a choice goes in. There's no term for unless somebody decides otherwise. The state at time zero determines the state at every future time, uniquely, completely, without appeal. Let me sketch this on the board. Imagine phase space as a vast landscape. Every possible configuration of the universe is one point in it. The actual universe is a single point sitting somewhere in that landscape right now, and the laws of physics are like a wind blowing across the landscape. Drop the point anywhere, and the wind carries it along one and only one streamline. The trajectories never fork, they never merge either, and hold on to that fact because it's going to matter enormously in a minute. One point, one wind, one path. That path is the entire history of the universe, past, present, and, here's the part that should make the hair on your neck stand up, future. Your future. The sentence you're going to say to your spouse tonight. The career you're going to quit in 9 years. On this picture, it's all just further downstream on a streamline that was fixed before the Earth existed. The man who saw this most clearly was Pierre-Simon Laplace around the turn of the 19th century, and he put it in the form of a famous thought experiment. Imagine an intellect, people now call it Laplace's demon, that knows the position and momentum of every particle in the universe at one instant and knows the laws. For such an intellect, Laplace said, nothing would be uncertain. The future, like the past, would be present before its eyes. Now, the demon is a fantasy. No such intellect can exist, and we'll get to why that matters more than people think. But the demon was never the point. The point is what the demon reveals about the structure of the laws. The information specifying your entire future is already contained right now in the present state of the world. It's not that the future is hard to see, it's that the future is redundant. It adds nothing that isn't already here. Now, at this point, everybody, and I mean everybody, I've had this conversation with taxi drivers and Nobel laureates, and the objections are identical. Everybody reaches for the same three escape hatches. So let's go through them one by one, and I'll show you why each of them is bolted shut. It's a bit of a nuisance for our sense of self-importance, but the ledger must balance. Escape hatch number one, chaos. People say, look, we've known since the 1960s that most systems are chaotic. The butterfly effect. Tiny differences in initial conditions blowing up exponentially. Weather can't be predicted past 2 weeks. Surely brains, which are far messier than weather, are unpredictable, and unpredictable means free. No. Let's be very precise here, because this is the single most common confusion in this entire subject. Chaos is a statement about prediction, not about determination. A chaotic system is 100% deterministic. That's actually part of the definition. The streamlines in phase space are still unique. They just diverge from their neighbors very fast. So any error in your knowledge of the starting point gets amplified until your forecast is garbage. But the universe doesn't forecast itself. The universe doesn't have an error in its knowledge of its own state. It is its own state. Exactly. Chaos means the demon needs infinitely precise data. It does not mean the trajectory forks. Unpredictable by us and undetermined are two completely different animals, and sloppy thinkers have been selling one as the other for 60 years. Escape hatch number two, and this is the big one, quantum mechanics. People say, but Newton was wrong. The world is quantum, and quantum mechanics has genuine randomness in it. God plays dice. Surely the dice give us our freedom back. Now look, I want to be honest with you, because this is where a lecture like this can slide into cartoon physics, and I refuse to do that. Here's the actual situation, and it's subtler and frankly worse for free will than the popular version. The fundamental equation of quantum mechanics, the Schrödinger equation, the modern heir to F equals m minus a, the equation this whole video is really about, is completely deterministic. Write it on the board. The rate of change of the quantum state equals the Hamiltonian acting on that state divided by IH bar. Given the wave function of a system now, that equation determines the wave function at all future times, uniquely, smoothly, with not a die in sight. The randomness people talk about only shows up at measurement, when the smooth evolution appears to be interrupted and one outcome gets selected. And whether that interruption is a real physical event or just what deterministic evolution looks like from inside one branch of it, that's the measurement problem. It's genuinely unsettled, and anyone who tells you it's settled is selling something. But here's the point, and the point is actually quite subtle. It doesn't matter. Suppose we grant the most generous reading. Suppose quantum outcomes are truly irreducibly random. What have you won? Randomness is not agency. If your decision to marry someone traces back to a quantum coin flip in a synapse, you didn't choose your spouse. A die did, and you're the readout. A choice you make for no reason is not more yours than a choice made for exhaustive reasons. It's less yours. This is the old dilemma, and it's a genuine pincer. If the prior state fixes your act, you're not its author. If the prior state doesn't fix your act, then the leftover slack is noise, and noise has no author at all. Determinism or randomness, Physics offers exactly these two ingredients, and neither one, nor any mixture of them, is the thing your gut means by free will. That's the trap. It was never about which theory of physics is right. Every theory we can write down is built from those two ingredients because equations only come in two flavors: the ones that fix the outcome and the ones that assign probabilities to it. There's no third flavor called the outcome is up to you. Nobody has ever written that term down because nobody knows what it would even mean mathematically. And escape hatch number three, the brain is too complicated for physics to apply, I'll dispatch quickly because it's not really an argument, it's a hope. The brain is warm, wet matter. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, ions drifting across membranes. Every one of those particles obeys the same Hamiltonian as the particles in this piece of chalk. Complexity buys you astonishing behavior. It does not buy you an exemption from the equations. Nothing does. That's what it means for them to be laws. Now, let me deepen this with something from my own corner of physics, because there's a principle underneath all of this that's even more ironclad than determinism, and almost nobody outside the field talks about it. It's the conservation of information. Remember I told you the streamlines in phase space never merge? In quantum mechanics, this becomes a theorem. We call it unitarity, and it says the universe never forgets. Distinct states now evolve into distinct states later, and distinct states now came from distinct states earlier. Information is never created and never destroyed. It's the deepest bookkeeping rule we have. When black holes seem to violate it, the field spent decades in crisis until we convinced ourselves they don't. Think about what that does to free will. A genuinely free choice would be new information, a bit injected into the universe that wasn't derivable from what came before. But unitarity says there are no new bits. Every bit describing your quote-unquote decision tonight is a rearrangement of bits that already existed this morning and last year and in the gas cloud that collapsed to form the sun. The ledger must balance down to the last entry. On this accounting, you are not an author adding lines to the book of the universe. You are a page being turned. All right, sit with that for a second, because that's the case for the prosecution, and I've given it to you at full strength on purpose. Now let me tell you about the philosopher. Because in the winter of 1870, a brilliant, miserable 28-year-old in Cambridge, Massachusetts, worked all of this out for himself, before quantum mechanics, before information theory, needing nothing but Laplace, and it very nearly killed him. His name was William James. Remember the name if you don't know it. He went on to more or less found American psychology and one of the only homegrown American schools of philosophy. But in 1870, he was nothing, a trained physician who couldn't bring himself to practice, living in his parents' house, sunk in a depression so severe he later described, thinly disguised as a patient's report, an experience of pure existential dread that left him afraid to be alone in the dark. And by his own account in his diary, a core of that crisis was exactly the argument I've spent this lecture building. He had taken the science of his day seriously, more seriously than the scientists did. If physiology was right, if the brain was matter and matter obeyed law, then his black moods were faded, his struggles against them were faded, even his despair about the fadedness was faded. Every avenue of escape was itself just another domino. You want to know what it feels like to actually believe determinism, not just recite it at dinner parties. It feels like that diary. Most people who claim to accept that free will is an illusion have never spent one honest hour inside the claim. James spent months. And then, in the spring of 1871, something happened that I find more interesting than any theorem I've put on this board today. James read an essay by a French philosopher named Charles Renouvier on precisely this question, and he wrote in his diary words to this effect, that he now saw no reason why Renouvilier's definition of free will, the sustaining of a thought because I choose to when I might have other thoughts, need be the definition of an illusion. And then came the sentence that made him immortal, the sentence I'd carve over the door of every physics department if they'd let me. He resolved that his first act of free will would be to believe in free will. Now look, I know what half of you are doing right now. You're smirking. You're saying, that's not an argument. That's a decision. He just declared victory by fiat. And here's what I want you to see. James knew that. That's the whole move. He understood, decades before anyone else framed it this way, that the free will question has a strange logical shape that almost no other question has. It's self-referential. Your belief about whether your choices matter is itself one of the causes acting on your choices. A man convinced he's a domino falls like a domino. James looked at the two available postures. Treat yourself as an author or treat yourself as a page, and noticed that physics could not, even in principle, hand him data to settle it, because any test he ran, any deliberation he performed, would look identical under both descriptions from the inside. And where evidence cannot decide and the stakes are your entire life, James said, you are entitled, rationally entitled, to choose the belief you can live by. He later built a whole philosophy on this, pragmatism, and a famous lecture called The Dilemma of Determinism, where he pressed the point from the other side. The determinist, he argued, can't even keep his own account straight, because the moment something terrible happens, the determinist says it could not have been otherwise, and yet in the very next breath calls it regrettable, which means judging that it ought to have been otherwise in a universe where otherwise is meaningless. The determinist's regret, James said, convicts the determinist's theory. You cannot live the doctrine, and a doctrine that cannot be lived, on James's accounting, has failed the only test that ultimately matters. It's a bit of a nuisance for our tidy equations, but let me now do something uncomfortable and turn the interrogation around on my own side of the room. Because here is what a century and a half of physics since Laplace has quietly conceded, and it's the part of this story the confident debunkers always leave out. The demon is not merely impractical, the demon is impossible, not engineering impossible, physics impossible. To predict the universe, the demon must be inside the universe, and a subsystem cannot contain a complete, faster-than-real-time model of the whole that contains it. The map would have to include the map. There are lovely self-reference arguments, cousins of Gödel's theorem, showing that a predictor embedded in a deterministic world can always be defeated by a system that reads the prediction and does the opposite. And you, when someone tells you what you're about to do, are exactly such a system. And on top of that, the state of your brain is quantum information. And quantum information cannot be copied. That's a theorem too, the no cloning theorem. So the demon can't even acquire the data without destroying the very state it needed to read. Chew on what this means. Determinism may be true, and yet the universe is constructed so that no possible being, anywhere, ever can cash it in. Your future is determined and undeliverable. The only process in existence that can find out what you will decide is you actually deciding in real time at full computational cost. There is no shortcut through you. The computation is irreducible. So what is a decision then on the coldest possible reading? It's a computation the universe cannot skip. And now I want to suggest it all carefully, because this is where I stop proving things and start professing them, that this reopens the door James walked through, Just a crack, but a real crack. Think about temperature. This room has a temperature. Is temperature an illusion? After all, really, there are only molecules with velocities. No individual molecule has a temperature. And yet, temperature is not a mistake. It's a true, robust, causally load-bearing description of the molecules taken at the right level, and if you ignore it, the coffee burns you all the same. Now run the same logic upward. At the level of particles, there are only streamlines in phase space, but you were never a particle. You are a pattern, a colossal, self-modeling, reason-weighing pattern, and at the level where you exists at all, the honest description of what happens when that pattern surveys options, simulates futures, and commits to one of them is, it chose. Deliberation isn't what freedom looks like when you strip the illusion away. Deliberation is what that stretch of deterministic evolution is, described at the only level where a you appears in the description. The equation doesn't run underneath your choosing, secretly doing the real work while you hallucinate authorship. At your scale, the equation running is the choosing. You are not a page being turned. You are the turning. Now, don't get confused. I have not smuggled a magic third ingredient into physics. Nothing forked. Unitarity still holds. The ledger still balances. If your definition of free will requires the streamlines of the universe to split at the moment of decision, then that free will does not exist, has never existed, and no future physics is going to rescue it. And I'd be lying to you from this chalkboard if I pretended otherwise. That is the illusion in the title, and it really is an illusion. But James's question was never that one. James asked whether the belief that your effort matters is a belief you're entitled to hold. And here's the final twist of the knife. The place where the physicist and the philosopher shake hands across a century and a half. In a deterministic universe, beliefs are causes. They're physical configurations of your brain, sitting upstream on the streamline of everything you do next. The belief, my effort is pointless, produces one class of futures. The belief, my effort is decisive, produces another. Both futures are determined, but they are determined through the belief, not around it. James's leap wasn't a violation of the equations. It was a man reaching into his own initial conditions and setting a variable. That is the strange loop at the center of this whole subject. Fatalism is false, even if determinism is true, because you are not a spectator to your causes. You are among them. So let me erase the board, all except the one equation, and leave you where I actually live with this. Somewhere in the state of the universe tonight, encoded in particles and fields, is what you will do with the rest of your life. You cannot read it. Nothing can read it. The only way it becomes known to you, to physics, to the universe itself, is for you to get up tomorrow and compute it, step by irreducible step, with your reasons and your efforts as live wires in the circuit. Call that free will or call it something else. I've stopped caring about the label. James stood in front of the same equation in a darker room than this one, with far less physics to comfort him, and he made his wager. Act as the author, because the page cannot regret, and you plainly can. 150 years later, with unitarity and no cloning and computational irreducibility on the board, I can tell you the equation never budged, and neither, it turns out, did the crack in the door he found. The future is written, yes, but it is written in your handwriting, and it is written nowhere else, and it is written only as fast as you live it. So go write it. The chalk, as far as anyone can prove, is in your hand.